Wonderful presentation. We're actually going to be welcoming a representative from the Arizona Center of Algae Technology and Innovation, Dr. Taylor Weiss, and he'll be speaking about the wonderful work and research the center does in advancing research into algae as a bioproduct.
Good afternoon. Thank you for the invitation. Can everyone hear me okay? So today's a little strange for me in that, number one, it's not an easy and short story with algae. It's not as simple as eat a bug, don't eat a cow, right? Algae provide a vast array of resources and advantages, and they're mostly ones that people aren't familiar with. And what we do at AzCati, and as I'll be explaining a little bit, is we explore the many different ways that algae underpin the natural world as you know it, whether you realize it or not, but also the future sustainability and all these supportive efforts. Okay? So, but it's multi-dimensional is in particular where I want to start. So first off, every second breath you take is due to oxygen formed by algae on this planet every single day. The fact that we have an oxygen atmosphere at all on Earth is because of millions, billions of years of algae doing photosynthesis. So it is really the underpinnings of large-scale geological cycles, especially with regards to the carbon cycle. And that's really the focus of why we get into looking at it for sustainable production of protein or really any product. But the reason why people focus also so much on algae is biotechnological advantages. So we see it as complementary to traditional agriculture. We call it alternative agriculture or furthering sustainability of agriculture. And one of the reasons for that is, number one, algae are everywhere, whether you realize it or not. Freshwater, on rocks, soil, trees, literally in animal furs. For instance, about half the diet of many sloths comes from algae they cultivate on a fur, and they strip it off and they eat it. Entire parts of their life cycle, differences between two-toed and three-toed sloths, why some go down to use the bathroom on the forest floor and others never come down at all, is because they're having to cultivate the algae on their fur and moths that lay their eggs and eat the algae for food and perpetuation of that life cycle. So algae are everywhere, right? Other things about it, freshwater, brackish saltwater, even hypersaline. The complementary to agriculture is primarily we don't have to use water that agriculture traditionally uses. We can use marginal water sources. Okay? That's really one of the largest areas of it, is that water is limited on land, and we're trying to not compete with traditional agriculture. Water is the main pressing point. pH is really big for bioproduction. So we have algae at our facility, for example, that come from thermal acidic hot springs out of Yellowstone National Park. They will grow below pH 2. They'll grow down to about 0.5. We don't actually know how low they can go, basically battery acid. Okay? And because of that, it's also a wonderful decontamination system, because anything that falls in generally can't grow below pH 2. Right? Things of that nature. So they have wonderful abilities, chemistries, that a land plant, growing at neutral pHs, simply don't have. We can also go to the opposite end of the spectrum. So spirulina, which we ate today, and I'll talk a little bit more about, the reason why those have been produced for so long, for so many years, is they're extremophiles. They grow at extremely high pH, where most things cannot predate upon them or grow in competition. That's how they stay clean. So there's a very long history of the most successful algae, whether you know or not, they're extremophiles. They're not competing with traditional resources. They're extreme in some respect. Temperature. There are many algae. Part of the main carbon cycle that occurs at the Arctic and Antarctic poles is in fact algae growing at near freezing temperatures. They just grow very, very slowly. So if you can also imagine algae at the bottom of the Black Sea where virtually no light penetrates, and they can grow on as little as 30 photons of light captured per year. They have the most primitive light harvesting systems on Earth. They grow on marginal light. There are also some algae that live at the bottom of the ocean near thermal vents, where the thermal chemistry emits photons, and they harvest that. They're doing photosynthesis at the bottom of the ocean. The reason for all this is, when you say the word algae, algae is an almost meaningless term. It is a catch-all term. It is what's left of protists when you can't define other things, okay? As a result of that, they're also poly and paraphyletic. What that means is they both share a common ancestor and don't. And how is that possible? Because of symbiosis, endosymbiosis. Cyanobacteria was consumed by a heterotroph that gave rise to green algae and what would eventually become plant ancestors. However, that cycle also continued. More heterotrophs consumed other algae, and on and on. So symbiosis, they have both a common lineage and a non-common lineage, meaning algae at this point in time, there are more kingdoms of life added to your textbooks virtually every decade because of algae. And also because they're now spread across 6 different kingdoms at this particular point, trying to resolve all these genetic differences. Okay? It's very complicated very fast. But the point here is when you say algae, the 2 things I want you to keep in mind is 1, because of all these natural climates, these natural abilities, bioprospecting. The thought you can go out into the world, find an algae that fulfills a role or an environment suited to your needs is very, very high. You can go out and find something to fit your process. But also, with this vast genetic diversity, the likelihood that you're also going to be able to modify that cell to produce something you want is also very, very high. So we talk a lot about the potential of algae. This is also what gives the area, as science, a lack of focus. There's so many things you can do with it. Everyone's doing their own small thing. There is no singular focus point. Right? That's both a strength and a weakness. So first, I just want to talk a little bit about how you probably know algae at all. And if any of you recognize it at all, it's probably this Windberry pinnifer, wakame, or sea mustard. Any of you who are just snacking outside and having those dried sheets, that's what you were eating, right? It's also used in things like sushi in particular, right? That's how most of you probably encounter it and probably think of it. You think of kelp or macroalgae. Okay? But in fact, macroalgae come in a whole lot of different varieties. And just like terrestrial plants, they come in particular different flavors. Saccharia latinacea, also called sugar kelp. Anyone want to take a guess why it's called sugar kelp? It's really sweet. And in fact, the secret to why it's sweet is, unlike land plants, it does not contain sucrose. It contains mannitol. So the common osmotic used by many sea algae are alcohol sugars. Mannitol, if you recognize it, it's the sweetener added to your sugar-free gum. So people recognize kelp often in place of, say, mustards and greens, but they in fact come in a huge variety of sweet and bitter and sour even. Because unlike terrestrial land plants that have alkaloids that protect them against insects in particular, they can taste really bitter. Many sea algae don't have that sweet. And when I say sea algae, I'm being careful with the term in that not necessarily seaweed, right? Seaweed implies it's a plant. These aren't plants, these are algae. Another good example, sea grapes, Calebra lentiflora. These are common in Southeast Asia. They're essentially an iodine-dense snack. They pop like tiny little water-filled vessels. It's not a major food source, but it is nutritionally easy to grow, found in shallow bottoms. So people who are pearl divers in particular have grown on these sorts of things for generations. I'll come back to them in just a minute. So this is maybe the way people view algae, right? As a product that maybe you can dry, you can pulverize, you can use in sushi, right? Maybe even whole in like a seaweed salad. That might be the way most people think about it. And that's the way it's currently done. However, algae are weird. Anything is possible. And one of the ways to think about that is over here, Nostoc piriformis, sometimes called mare's eggs. These are cyanobacteria. This is a colony. And this is a colony which normally they're very small, about 1 millimeter. There are cases where they grow up the size of bowling balls. Right? So that is a single cell growing in a colony, growing a dense amount of biomass in a single area, up to the point where it's obviously easily harvestable by hand. Contrast this with Colonia ventricosia, sometimes called bubble algae. This is a common infection in people's aquarium tanks at home. That's why occasionally you have to clean off your rocks with a small plane of bleach. This is a single cell. This is the largest single cell in the world. It is a single cell because it is multinucleated. That is, the genome replicates. There are many nuclei, but a single plasma membrane develops the entire cell around a cellulosic cell wall. But that is, by definition, a single cell. And this has a particular source in history in electrophysiologists, neurobiology. These were the very first cells used in the invention of patch clamps, that is studying the electrophysiology of a single cell. All that work was derived out of this because it was a bigger cell. You could start working on these sorts of things. What's also funny is these sea grapes you see here, this is also a single cell. They're non-sepulated. So when we talk about unicellular, multicellular tissue, algae start really blurring the lines because this is a colonial organism, but it's not multicellular. This is single cellular. This even has basically tissue level specialization, but it's still a single cell. So algae can start filling in all kinds of strange, odd physiological parameters. What we're mostly focused on are microalgae. Microalgae, by definition, we're going to sort of sidestep many of those higher levels of operation and focus on single individual cells. And why are we talking about single individual cells? It's because they can grow exponentially. They grow really fast. Like crickets can reproduce more quickly than cows, same idea. Okay? So for average doubling rate of microalgae, the ones we grow in the field, some of them have doubling rate on the average of every 6 hours. Okay? So you can grow a phenomenal amount of biomass on sunlight very, very quickly. This is also where Algae Biomass Organization, this is their figure, that's why I stole it from them. They like to say, one cell, a world of possibilities. Because you have a single cell, and that single cell must essentially provide all its own resources, it must derive all these resources. It's also, like every single cell, it can be rich in protein, it can be rich in lipids, it can be rich in carbohydrates, but it must make all three in some proportion all the time. So you'll have cells that are naturally good at one thing or the other, but you can also induce them to be proportionally more one product over the other. And when we talk about growing algae, this is also where things get tricky, is that we're never just growing them for a single purpose. It's what are the resources, what are the services that are also going on at the exact same time. So the main one people might think about is, when we talk about this algae in the food, energy, water nexus, we're always pulling on all these areas at once. We're generally making food using less energy or solar power as a displacement. We're making food without competing with terrestrial land requirements in particular. And water, we're almost always cleaning up the water. We're almost always basically trying to avoid an algal bloom in nature by throwing one in a pond, making use of recycling nutrition. One of the ones you probably recognize most is CO2, right? Algae grow on CO2, and unlike terrestrial land plants, we can pump extra CO2 in a pond. I can't easily fill a field full of corn with extra CO2 to make them grow faster, or at least I shouldn't. Right? But we can also do it even from the mutable surface. That is, especially extremophiles, you don't have to clean the CO2 even potentially before you pump it into the pond, which is an expensive process. Again, non-fresh water, non-arable land is often the big focus. We can grow more crops without having to displace more land. When we often expand the function of land plants, reducing their nutritional requirements or salinity tolerance, all those sorts of things, that's seen as a good thing, as a hedge against the future of global climate change. But at the same time, what you're often doing is you're creating plants that are more amenable to grow in new land, which are often code for forests, at least in further deforestation. You have to be able to grow more crops without further deforestation, which exacerbates CO2 cycling numbers. This is one of the ways to do it. And we can capture the CO2 from the point source. We don't have to emit it to recapture it. Nutrients in particular. Phosphorus in particular, as I think some people know, is a limited resource. We mine it, we extract it, but when we lose it, it's basically gone. Nitrogen we can cycle more effectively. We're talking about collecting these sources when they're concentrated and focusing into a process. Grow them in large ponds like these. These are in Hawaii, incidentally, just a commercial group. And then over here you have treatment of the gases, treatment of the water, but then also this alternative agriculture, right? Out of this biomass, you can go many different directions. And to be clear, we're not talking about one cell providing all these products. We're talking about many different pathways. You grow different algae for different purposes. You can take a portion of that biomass, send it into one product or another product. But we're always, traditionally, extracting out oil, for example, biodiesel, green diesel, jet fuel, gasoline, biopolymers, all these sorts of high-value components. But then what's left over is usually the low-value component is inevitably food, the protein component. And so we have animal feed in particular. One of the underpinnings of aquaculture is, not surprisingly, many of the fish that we feed with soybean. But their most natural food source that's most easily digestible for them, shouldn't surprise anyone, is algae. Supplementing their food with algae leads to better growth and outcomes, especially nutritionally, things of that nature. Fertilizer, right? More complex fertilizers are better for plants, and it reduces especially runoff. Runoff of excess nitrogen and phosphate soil is what often leads to algal blooms in nature. Again, we're talking about growing protein that is essentially not necessarily going to feed you directly. It's going to go to feed a plant that is making food for you in a more sustainable fashion and higher protein contents in plants. And also things like sugars and minerals. So these are some of the ways that you've probably seen algae or might encounter. Again, things like Arthrospirulina's, newly called Limnospira, is a spirulina. Spirulina is a health food supplement. Dries a powder like this in a canister. Why is it grown? Because the amino acid content is extremely favorable for human consumption. It's been grown and eaten by traditional native cultures in Mexico and Africa and Southeast Asia for centuries. And the reason why they eat it is because these are areas that were protein deprived. So it's highly comfortable. And it's also particularly rich in vitamins. And this story of the rich in vitamins being associated with the protein is one played out throughout energy. Bioavailability is a big deal. If you take now vitamins, extract them, feed them to a person, that form is often too condensed, the person can't bring it in efficiently. There's this massive overproduction of vitamins that people consume, and then it goes out in their waste uselessly. Part of the focus of algae is, can we provide those necessary vitamins in a form which the person can intake, but we're not making basically the excess. This is a big point in global equality, right? Effectively, are rich people eating all the vitamins, and poor people aren't getting them? If we could be more equitable about their distribution. This is one way. Don't grow and extract. Just feed it as protein. This is another way that people don't do it. Metacoccus. Metacoccus makes this red pigment called astaxanthin. This is the hidden compound that makes salmon flesh pink. What makes flamingos pink? It makes shrimp pink. Naturally, in the wild, this is what the flesh looks like. The major production of aquaculture of salmon in the United States and most of the world didn't take off because consumers wouldn't eat this salmon. They thought it was unhealthy. By the addition of this natural pigment that accumulates in the flesh, now people are buying this. Now you have more terrestrial agriculture simply through the inclusion of this pigment. And it's also an antioxidant. It's not wrong to say that this fish is probably healthier for you than that fish. And we're trying to include it in the human diet. So algae is not playing a role up front, it's playing a role on the backside and increasing the value people assign to economically support growth. And this is a natural process. So the algae make it in phenomenal quality. Fish, it just bioaccumulates in the flesh. And so fish are not the source of this molecule, algae. And that is the same story for using chlorella, for example, to make omega-3 fatty acids, you may have heard. Why eat fish? Because it's full of antioxidants, it's full of omega-3s. Well, that's actually there because of the algae. The fish are just the conveyance method into your diet. Omega-3 are probably the most underproduced vitamin in the world that the UN recognizes. There simply isn't enough world production. We don't want to keep harvesting the oceans for these omega-3s. So we're going straight to the source, basically. Okay. At the same time, B12 and omega-3s, what's very surprising about them, but also very unique, it accumulates in chicken eggs. So one of the ways of displacing the necessary need for omega-3s in fish production, very much being looked at, is feed chickens algae, and it ends up in the eggs. This can lead to a vegetarian lifestyle that is supportive of B12 health and omega-3. Yes, I know you're saying either. I'm sorry I have to get to this, but these are the sorts of roles that algae are playing. Okay, it's not always necessarily as simple as I grow algae, I eat the algae. Okay, it's playing this background feature that is supportive of traditional agriculture and new modern agriculture. We grow algae every single day. The person may never have eaten as a food source before, but now we're looking at it. This is part of a national effort. So there's a national test bed effort, and it was started under ATP3, which involved poly ASU sites from companies in Hawaii, Florida, Georgia, also known as Texas. And the federal government and all these partners sat together. Remember, traditional agriculture has had thousands of years to develop. We're really just at the nascent level. And the first thing these test beds did, in collaboration with open test bed forum, was everyone's got to use the same equipment, everyone's got to run the same tests, and when everyone grew the same biomass and traded and ran their own tests, everyone got different answers. You can't build an industry if you can't compare things one to one to one. We are now essentially de facto at ASU test bed for the Department of Energy. We are paid to grow year after year for no other reason than to collect real world data. We don't grow for 1 week and multiply by 52. We go, sometimes it's sunny, sometimes it's cloudy, sometimes your pond will get contaminated. We're just going to grow and accumulate the data. We've been very successful at growing, enhancing productivities about 10% year after year. So even within the last 5 years, we're now, as a nation, about 30% more efficient at growing algae than we were. And what it really boils down to, why is this in engineering? Growing algae is easy. Growing algae and making money is hard, okay? It is mostly about cost. You can always make a fancier bioreactor, but it's going to be a more expensive one. And for example, when it comes to biofuels, we can get to about $7 per gasoline equivalent, okay, $7 per gallon. You need to get to 3. The main thing holding us back from this report in particular is it's capital cost. It's the cost of your equipment that's too expensive. So what a lot of people like me do is we work on the biology, making biology more amenable, not to fancier systems, but cheaper systems. That's what's going to lead to further implementation of a lot of this. Also out of this report, the 2 major developments came out of it is about 85% of cost reduction associated with biology, GMO introduction. On the other side, also in this particular case, was hydrothermal liquefaction. Don't separate out the oil from algae at all, just cook the biomass. And now all of a sudden, instead of growing high lipid content algae, we're growing high protein content algae. Because we can essentially strip out the nitrogen and recycle it more effectively while transforming it into a fuel than we ever could growing a high density lipid algae. A lot of innovation required, but most development these days is about CapEx, it's about the cost of your equipment. And that's really what AzCati is for. As an open test bed, we grow things at scale. We have a very big lab, and we have a 2-acre field site. Our largest pond holds about 250,000 gallons. We grow and develop and test things at scale because what works in the lab doesn't often work in the real world, right? That shouldn't surprise anyone. But we have to run it at scale. And our commitment in this area has been about $60 million estimated. So there's a lot of money in this area if any students are interested in this work. Okay? Our mission in particular is to accelerate the advancement of all algal technology, commercialization, research, education, collaboration. There is more than enough work to go around, there's more than enough partners. I'm going to skip through this a little bit, but in particular, the products we focus on, food, feed, fuel, nutraceuticals, soil supplementation, organic fertilizer, natural pigments, minerals, is a long list. It is to say, when you grow an algae, multi-purpose, right? Many different questions to be answered all at the same time. And we're primarily focused especially on carbon capture and bioremediation, but also co-products. Again, if you can grow an algae, but make a high-value component to it, you can help pay the economics of the process. Also, life cycle assessment and techno-economics. So, is it going to make money? And we're only going to do this if it's better than the alternative or good for the environment. These are examples of that technology. There are lots of different ways to grow out flat panels, tubular bioreactors, plastics. Our site has essentially become a de facto plastics testing facility. The greatest limit to our lifetime is UV, high temperatures, high oxygen from the tanks, and stressors, filling and emptying water, and those effects. These are sorts of things you don't learn about in the lab. We also get involved in harvesting technologies. And some of you may have seen the news most recently, this idea of having carbon capturing trees. This is part of Paul Schlossman's research at ASU. We use that technology first to capture, concentrate CO2 to feed to our algae. So we have self-made, essentially, CO2 on site. All right, I know you're going to stand there. Thank you very much.